Welcome to Sollu Kaburz podcast, and it's cricket time, and it's one of the most exciting, the most exciting series of this entire year, which has been a pathetic year. Because it was a pathetic year because I actually had tickets for T20 World Cup in Australia for India vs England match at MCG, right? And I didn't opt for the refund. I'm hoping I'll get there one day when that happens. But today we're going to talk about all things India vs Australia, and I have with me a fellow Aussie podcaster, presenter, but we as Indians who follow Cricbuzz, we know him mostly as a presenter because your chats with Michael Vaughan are absolute pleasure. I mean, you were our insights to the summer that happened in England. Thank you very much for doing this. Pleasure having you.
That's a very kind introduction. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Straight away, Adam. So here's the thing. Your country is seems like having fun, right? So, because I look on Instagram, people are going out and on beaches, on the fest. So I think COVID is pretty much under control in Australia. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think within reason it is. I'm in quarantine at the moment in Perth, so I've not actually been out in the general population since returning home. That'll be the case next week. But I think as a rule, COVID, the states have done a really good job with COVID. The individual state areas, so that a lot of the responsibilities have fallen on their shoulders, and it's meant that when they've needed to pull the lever to wind back social engagements, have been able to do so quite effectively. So where I am here in Perth, I don't know how long it's been since I've had a socially contracted case of COVID, but it's been a very long time. And the same applies to South Australia. They had a small breakout a couple of weeks ago, but it's largely been under control there since April. Melbourne, there was a big spike, a second wave, which was very challenging. That's my home city. That necessitated, I think it was an 80-day lockdown or something like that, which was obviously very hard for those that were under those conditions. But I think the alternative reality, which is where I live in London, where we've been in a version of lockdown for the majority of the year, and the cases have been never really contained with the exception of perhaps August, and obviously the second wave's been even more problematic than the first as far as case numbers are concerned. I think most Australians, if not all Australians, would prefer the reality that they've experienced over 2020 than the alternative in the UK, for example.
Right. And because I see players going out, roaming around, I think the lockdown rules for the players are not as stringent as the ones in UK, where players had to hold themselves up in stadium within the hotel and so on, right? So can you tell a little bit about the rules that players are experiencing now in Australia, if you know anything about it?
Yep. Well, I don't have a huge insight to that other than the fact that it's largely, as you've explained, they are in, they still have to remain in the bubble, but there is the capacity for them to not exclusively be living in cricket grounds. And that's where the challenge was in the English summer. It wasn't just that they were in bubbles, that they were in bubbles in hotels inside the ground. So to put that into perspective, when I went into that bubble for a couple of weeks for the Australia-England T20s and one days, which I was doing radio for, it meant that your hotel room the view out the window would be the cricket ground. Now, for cricket nuts, that seems like a glorious reality. And look, I quite enjoyed it. But imagine your job is to be a player. You need that time away from the game. You need to unplug from the whole experience. And they found that very challenging. So I think that, yes, it'll be less onerous in Australia, but I think it was quite acute in England because they were actually in the cricket ground.
Right. And what a pleasure it is to have crowds back in the stadium again, right? Because although it's a reduced capacity, right, but still decent amount of noise if we have witnessed in the T20s and the one-day internationals. I hope that's the case in test matches as well.
Yeah, I think it'll vary. Well, it will vary rather from state to state. So in some instances like Melbourne, I think it's going to be 25,000 permitted to come to each test playing day, which is roughly a quarter of the MCG, but 25,000 people in that Coliseum can make a lot of noise. There was a full capacity crowd at the SCG for the third T20, which of course with India in town means that the crowd's roughly 80% India, 20% Australia, something like that. Usually when India are playing white ball internationals in Australia, maybe 70-30, but it'll mean that wherever India go, they'll still be the home team no matter what.
There are a lot of people, Adam. And one of the most biggest suspense was how's the series going to unfold in test matches, right? Because one of the best things about playing in Australia is the character of the grounds itself, right? Gabba is different from Melbourne, is different from Sydney, from Perth, right? So that we were this close to losing that, right? Because the plan was to play everything in Melbourne, Adelaide, I guess, but that changed.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. It is a charming part of Test cricket around the world, but as you say, in Australia, there is the fast pitches of Brisbane and that sort of tropical climate. Mentioned the Coliseum of the MCG, granted flat tracks, but an extraordinary experience in and of itself. The older ground of Sydney with the members stand and the ladies stand sitting side by side. And then Adelaide Oval, which is pound for pound the best cricket ground in the world and has been remodelled quite stunningly over the last 12 years. I think it's been now since they initially started doing the renovation there. That horseshoe and the integrity of the far end with the cathedrals and the hill and the old scoreboard is all there. So as far as 4 venues for 4 test matches, this is a wonderful balance. Whereas 2 years ago, they didn't play a test at Brisbane in favour of using the new stadium out towards the casino there in Perth. And there's a lot to be said for that ground as far as the conditions. The pitch is broken up both times. It's been quick and enjoyable to watch as a spectator. But I think that from, historically a ground that Australia have performed well at, the Gabba, they haven't lost a test match there since 1988. So it should mean that the series is ending at a ground where it'll be challenging for India to win, which, I mean, if you're going to use your home ground advantage, that's not a bad way of doing it.
Right. And, folks, Adelaide has the best sunset over a cricket stadium in the world. Let me add to that.
I'd say Adelaide and Canberra side by side. They both Manuka, where some of the white ball internationals are played as well. It's renowned for having a beautiful purple orange sky as well. But you're right, Adelaide with the pink ball test match next week. It's a lovely contrast towards the green and the white and the pink on the ground and the colours you see in the sky as the sun's setting in that third session.
Suggest me if I'm buying a ticket in Adelaide Oval, where am I supposed to buy? It is more towards mid-wicket so that I face the sunset that way. Is that correct?
I always go out towards the eastern stand. So there's 5 stands named after footballers on the eastern side of the ground. And that's where you get the best possible view of the sun coming down. When you're at the southern end, the riverbank end, the city end, as it used to be known, you still get a good view of the sunset to your left and you're looking behind the bowler's arm. That's the best place to watch from as a cricket purist, being behind the bowler's arm. And we get to enjoy that as in the commentary box where we sit. For radio, it's right behind the bowler's arm, albeit on the top level. So you're quite a far way back. But to make the most of the sunset, if you are side on, it's not a bad thing being side on the eastern side of the ground.
Right. And look, we can talk about Kohli and absence of Kohli all day. But to be fair to you, let's start with Australia, right? So I mean. Okay. Multiple it's an entirely different team from the last series, right? It's just chalk and cheese now. You have few concerns and I want to go a bunch of interesting things that I am looking forward to in this series. So for example, first thing is new Labuschagne versus Indian bowling attack will be a very interesting contest, isn't it?
Yeah, the Marnus Labuschagne that we are seeing at the moment, in many respects, the first taste of that was against India at Sydney 2 years ago. He was brought back for that 4th and final test match and made an accomplished half century at number 3 when nobody really expected to see him play test cricket that summer, having made his debut in the UAE at the start and didn't do so well with the bat, but got his opportunity and looked the part. Now, and then he went on to bat quite nicely indeed against Sri Lanka in Brisbane and we didn't do so well in Canberra, if I recall correctly, but did well in Brisbane. And I suppose the point here about Labuschagne is that each time he's been required to take a step up, he's done it pretty well as an Australian cricketer. There's nothing about Marnus Labuschagne's first-class numbers before he was picked for Australia that necessarily distinguished himself. He was a useful player for Queensland with bat and ball, but not a player who was being necessarily touted as the number 1 batsman on the planet, which is he's not that, but as far as the way that he's performed over the last 12 months, he's in that top echelon.
Right.
He's like a Steve Smith clone as far as
like
the way
2.0. Labuschagne 2.0 is Smith 2.0.
Yeah, there is definitely something to be said for that. I had the great pleasure of watching the Australian team train when I'm covering their test matches, which is kind of all of them. And the way that Labuschagne prepares and the way that he engages with Steve Smith, they've become very close friends as well. And I suppose Labuschagne's been fairly forthright in this, that he identified Smith as the player that he wanted to emulate. And the way to do that is to pick up on Smith's habits and patterns. And you see, it goes as far as the way that he leaves the ball with that lightsaber. Now, that's nothing he wouldn't have, rather, that's not something he would have done. He would have been practicing if not for the influence of Smith, especially in England last year when he came into the Test side. So,
Right.
Taken as a whole, a player like Labuschagne now with, I think he's got 4 Test centuries to his name. I think that's right. All of them were last summer, weren't they? So there was the double ton at Sydney and 3 others. It means that, sure, he hasn't enjoyed the chance to play Test cricket since January, but it'll mean he's just gagging for it. I mean, you can imagine how much he'll be looking forward to this challenge, Labuschagne.
Right. And that partnership has been well documented in the test on Amazon Prime. But what would Indian bowlers be doing to, get a hold of this partnership, right? With Smith and Labuschagne is just like the backbone of Australian test batting order in a sense, because, you have injuries, which we'll talk about them in a bit. But what do you think Indians will be going about with them? Go Neil Wagner style, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think exactly that. The Smith lack of runs comparatively, he didn't make no runs against New Zealand. I think he averaged 40 odd last summer, but in Steve Smith terms, a lean return. The fact that Wagner was able to get him out in the leg side trap a number of times, it'll be something that I am sure will be plan A, plan B, and plan C for India's bowlers. I mean, why wouldn't it be? They'll take advantage of that to the extent they can. But as we know, having watched Smith over a long period of time now, he likes to identify weaknesses and systematically overcome them. So where Smith version circa rather 2015 sometimes had a bit of a problem with overcorrecting with his big trigger movement over to 5th or 6th stump, you press fast forward 12 months and that balance issue wasn't there anymore because he worked out what it was and he identified it and fixed it. So it will be fascinating to see how he responds to the inevitable short pitch barrage that'll be coming his way.
And do you think he's the key difference? Is it fair to say that Warner and Smith were the key difference between the 2018 series and the current series? In a sense, is it fair to say? But because the result will be different because of the presence of Smith and Warner?
I don't think just because of those two players, but they are certainly part of the solution, if you like. I mean, Australia are the number 1 test team in the world right now, and you can debate whether that's a quirk of the ICC system. And I think most Australian fans and most close watchers of the game would say that to truly be the top team in the world, they'll need to beat India after India won 2 years ago. They haven't beaten India since 2014-15. And if they want to have a genuine claim on that title rather than a statistical claim, it'll require beating India. And 2 years ago, India flogged Australia. I mean, I know they won in Perth. That could have gone either way. Brilliant Kohli century wasn't enough. But largely, I mean, there wasn't a single Australian who made a century in the 18-19 season, summer, when India are out across those 4 test matches. So that was the primary difference. And you look at Smith and Warner, and they are prolific century makers, and they can add Labuschagne to that list. And even since then, really, I mean, Travis Head has gone on to register a test 100. So I think that's important for Travis Head, having kind of cleared that hurdle. He was a junior member of the side in 18-19. He's a more senior player now. He was captaining the Australian A side against the Indian tourist in Sydney this week, for example. And then Matthew Wade, who wasn't in the mix 2 summers ago, but he's had a fairly productive return to Australian colours as recent as this week when he was doing so well for the white ball team. So yes, it is Smith and Warner, but it's more broadly, it's the hundreds they're able to score now as a batting group compared to where they were 2 years ago when it really was Australia's annus horribilis after what happened at Newlands in Cape Town. You can't overstate the psychological damage that did to Australian cricket, and that was really felt strongest on the field against India, who were at the peak of their powers, against a vulnerable Australian team without the 2 senior players you mentioned before, and they were able to exploit that. So Australia were at their lowest ebb then, and that's not the case anymore.
That is a massive thing that you said, right? Because mentally, Australia was a different team in the previous series, right? I mean, even if there was no, I mean, most likely David Warner is in doubt. I mean, even if you omit Smith out of the equation, right? Australia team mentally is a different team right now than it was a couple of years ago, right? Because a couple of years ago
Yeah.
they were in shambles.
Yeah, I think that even though it was an acute incident, which we all saw on the big
Hmm.
screen at Newlands, it was one moment in time that's
Hmm.
been replayed and will be replayed forever. The fallout was like a slow motion car crash. I mean,
Hmm.
it kept getting worse and worse and worse. The more information that came out in those 2 weeks in South Africa that followed the ball tampering episode, and then upon arriving home, it was the cultural review. It was the suspensions to the players. It was getting thrashed in England 5-0 in one-day cricket, getting beaten heavily in the T20 as well. It was losing the tri-series in Zimbabwe, a small footnote in that year, but again it was emblematic of the fact that Australia just couldn't win. They just couldn't win through that period of time, and then they ran into India with, as I say, kind of the team was never better than when they beat Australia in 2018-19. I mean, of course, they performed admirably in England earlier in 2018 and somehow managed to lose 4-0, 4-1, wasn't it? Which still
Yeah,
bewilders me. It was a far closer series than that.
exactly.
But India were in tremendous shape, especially in their bowling unit, which you wouldn't always say about an Indian team coming to Australia. Usually their seamers have been dispatched fairly handily. But in 2018-19, Bumrah complementing Ishant Sharma, Mohammad Shami, Bhuvi and Umesh Yadav in the wings,
Right.
and I think Hardik Pandya as an option as well. They were so strong.
Right.
The contrast to earlier India sides was there. And the low ebb that Australia were at, it meant that India were able to take full advantage, and they did it expertly.
Mm. And what about the Australian bowlers now? Who's fit? Who's not fit? What's happening with Stark? And how about Hazelwood? You know what I mean?
Yeah, injuries are a consideration with bat and ball, really. David Warner won't play the first Test match in Adelaide. He's been ruled out today. So Marcus Harris has been brought into the squad. So they've got a few different options there. Will Pucovski has a mild concussion. So whether he's fit to make his Test debut will hinge on how quickly he recovers from that as well. But let's assume he won't play. So Marcus Harris could end up from the outside the squad in India 11, which is worth noting, the Victorian left-hander. As to the bowling considerations, I mean, Pat Cummins has been rested from the T20s, which seemed like a pretty good idea to me for a guy that's done so much work in short-form cricket over the last 3 or 4 months in England and in the IPL. There is an ongoing debate as to where the IPL fits for Australian fast bowlers, because it does mean from time to time they need to take time away from the game. Now, Mitchell Starc didn't play in the IPL this year, but has been on compassionate leave.
Because of which I'm very much disappointed, because he was in RCB, my favorite team, where I belong from Bangalore. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go on.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But historically, it's been a debate as to whether Australian quicks should go. You look at Josh Hazelwood back in the IPL of 2015. He didn't make himself available for the auction, and that played out really well for him. He played 6 Test matches in the Caribbean, then England, and he trailed away a bit at the end, but there's no way they would have got that much cricket out of him if he was backing up off an IPL. So, yeah, it's about managing resources. Now, Starc didn't go to the IPL, but he has been missing through the second part of the white ball series, or the final part of the white ball series, due to a family illness. So the expectation is he'll be back, but that's one area that Australia really are sorted for Ian Wiz. I mean, the Pattinson is fit and firing and bowled brilliantly in the first innings against India A. Michael Neser contributed in both innings, and those would be the next 2 cabs off the rank alongside Hazelwood, Starc and Cummins. It might even be that Pattinson is able to fight his way into the starting 11. Who's to know? He was certainly in the starting 11 when Australia played New Zealand at Melbourne and Sydney last year. Although the most likely scenario is it'll be Starc, arrested Cummins, and Hazelwood, who's had a tremendous white ball year. When he started 2020, Josh Hazelwood was really nowhere to be seen in Australian white ball cricket, but he was given a stint in the Big Bash League, did so well that they took him to India, bowled the house down in India in those 3 one-day internationals. People often forget how well he bowled in that series. And he's never bowled better with the white ball than in England back in September, where he was comfortably the best Australian seamer. So he comes into this series with, of course, not a lot of red ball form because he's been playing white ball cricket, but he's good to go. He's in good shape, didn't play a lot of IPL So he was sitting on the bench for the majority of that competition. So he doesn't have that workload problem that I mentioned with players like Stark and Cummins, who when they're playing in the IPL tend to play every game. So yeah, I think that's the likely scenario. And then Nathan Lyon will round out the attack as he's done so well since 2011.
And what about the batsmen though? So David Warner is injured. So Marcus Harris is bought in. So assuming that Pukowski was not injured, was there a debate where give the young fella a chance, or go with the old experience of Marcus Harris? What would have happened? Like speculative fiction, if you may.
Sure. Well, I think that there is a strong urge for Will Pukowski to play Test cricket now. Remember, he was in the squad 2 years ago and admitted himself on mental health grounds, a route he's taken a few times as a professional cricketer. And to his immense credit, when he's been able to put his hand up and say that he's been needing some extra treatment and thus not willing to subject himself to the rigours of high-end cricket when he's not feeling at his best. So, that has been an ongoing concern for him, but he feels like he's through that now.
Right.
Alongside that, he's suffered, I think we're up to 8 concussions now after copping that blow to the head yesterday. Yeah. So they have to manage him very carefully. So if he didn't end up with that concussion, I think they would have found a way for Will to play, whether it was as an opener. Now, remember, Will Pukowski's only played 3 games of first-class cricket as an opener. The 2 for Victoria and then the 1 for Australia A. And in the first 2 for Victoria, that was the initiation of Chris Rogers, the new Victorian coach, who saw there could be an opportunity at the top of the list for Australia alongside David Warner with Joe Burns in a poor run of form, and it worked. He made back-to-back double hundreds and got himself in that squad. So the expectation was that Pukowski would be given the chance to open, but equally over time, historically, they liked to blood new Australian batsmen at number 6. So there would have been potentially a case for that. But now with Will out of the frame, Cameron Green having made a century for Australia A, the 21-year-old, only 21 years old, has such a fantastic first-class record already for West Australia, and a well-timed century there for Australia A, a couple of wickets as well, means that it'll be very, very tempting indeed to find a way to get him in at number 6, which will require a reshuffle, but I suppose they'll take the view that players like Matthew Wade and Travis Head are experienced enough that if they need to shuffle around the batting order, they can.
Right. And what about the opening combination? I mean, Marcus Harris and Joe Burns are not exactly, no offense to them, right? So maybe someone like perhaps, where is Usman Khawaja in a sense, right? Maybe he could have been brought in as an opener. What were your other alternatives in case of, Warner was injured?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's just say Harris is no lock to play. I think he will because they've brought him into the squad, but they could easily recalibrate the top 6 so that, Wade, Head or Labuschagne could feasibly open to facilitate the mix they want, I suppose, in order to get Green into the team, that is. Right. But let's assume that what you say does play out. Look, the alternatives, as you say, Usman Khawaja has a fine record as an opener for Australia in the limited number of times that he's played that role, most memorably in the heat of Dubai in 2018 with one of the most extraordinary innings I've ever seen in Test cricket.
Yes.
Very different conditions to playing at Adelaide with the pink ball under lights. But in saying that, with the pink ball under lights in 2016-17, he played one of his other masterpiece innings against the excellent South African attack of Rabada, Philander and Kyle Abbott, who bowled out Australia for 80 at Hobart the previous week. Well, Khawaja had to open in that Test match at Adelaide the following game and made a masterful century. One of control where he put away his best shot, his cover drive, much as Tendulkar did all those years ago at the SCG. Khawaja put his cover drive away and was willing to let the bowlers bowl to him, and it worked quite well. So that'd be one option. And Shaw Marsh would be, I guess, the outsider. Yes, he's 37 years old. Yes, by all reports, his international career has formally come to an end, according to what we've heard from inside the Australian camp. But he's averaged 95 this year for WA in 4 first-class games with 3 centuries. If looking for an experienced man who's in form, who has done okay as an opener in the past, that might be the break glass if needed. But they've gone the other way in the first instance and added Marcus Harris to the squad. Right.
And coming to one of the biggest questions of this current summer is captaincy. All right. So Smith, Tim Payne, and the comments from Mokwa and other veterans. Right. So what's your take on that? So was there a ban on Smith's captaincy for X number of years? So is he now eligible? So can you please explain that situation if you can?
Yeah, he was banned from the team for a year and the captaincy for 2. So
Right.
on March the 29th this year, he could have captained Australia again at any time. Now, I mean, that's going to continue to be a debate that bubbles away in Australian cricket, I think, around the transition. Tim Paine turned 36 yesterday, so it's, he won't be around forever. Aaron Finch wants to play until the next World Cup. So it's possible, I suppose, that that Finch playing on for at least 3 more years could create a dynamic where it's not really an issue in white ball cricket, and in red ball cricket, Paine carries on and thus the conversation might move on. But if Paine was to retire in the next 12 to 18 months, then maybe there would be a case for reinstating Smith on the basis that he'd be the most senior player. However, there's a weight of evidence against that about Smith being far better suited to being a member of the ranks. I suppose anecdotal evidence really, but having watched him captain and the burden and the stress and the strain and the toll that took on him the first time around. So yes, former players are paid to have an opinion, and they'll express those opinions accordingly.
Right.
And that's fine. Every former player who works in the media will have a view on this, and they're not uniform views. Some would like to see Smith captain again. Others wouldn't. Others want to see Pat Cummins as the next captain. I mean, you can pretty much form any view you want based on the pundits. But I think if you're looking at it from a journalistic perspective on what's most likely as far as gathering the evidence is concerned, after Tim Paine does retire, it feels like there'll be an emphasis on going into another generation rather than going to Stephen Smith, who by that stage will be well into his 30s.
Right. And you think he'll pull through till next Ashes, Tim Paine, by any chance? If you can guess.
Well, I think I think the next Ashes in Australia would be a more realistic goal in the first instance. He got recalled for that Ashes series in 17-18 and kept really well and did his job with the bat as well. And his reputation was enhanced after being a real bolter to be brought into that squad at the last minute. And he's obviously been the incumbent wicketkeeper ever since. And the majority of that time has been spent as captain. So, the work that Tim Paine's been doing is important work in reinventing this Australian team, if you like, and finding a different way to lead it. So, I mean, hard to say for sure what his ambition would be, but I think that you often hear from senior players that they try and set short and medium-term goals. They don't try and set long-term goals that can be burdensome for them. So the fact that he's now 36, I mean, that'll mean he'll turn 37 during the next Ashes series. Who's to know? They might beat India 4-0 and he might say that's a great time to leave. He might pick a moment which is suitable at the top of Australian cricket, leading them back to number 1. If they have a good result, a comprehensive result against India, I'm not saying they will, but I don't want to annoy the Kohli fans out there. If they have a strong result against India, then that might be a good time for Paine to pull the pin. But in saying that, that lure of the most important series for Australian cricketers will always be the Ashes, and that will be on his horizon. Whether he would go all the way through to 2023, well, I don't think he would even be willing to consider that question right now.
Right. And how can we not talk about Indian team? Because, one of the biggest news would be, I would straight away get into Kohli's absence. So on a broadcasting level, what is the impact there, right? We can talk about on a team level for later, but on a broadcasting level, I mean, do you think that must be taking off a few eyeballs in a sense, because Kohli is the billing, right? In essence.
He is top billing, but cricket's a team sport.
Right.
And I think that people will tune in to watch India-Australia, one of the best rivalries in cricket. You go back and chart the rivalry between these sides since 1996.
Right.
And it's a wonderful story. I'm currently working on a podcast documentary about that very thing. And it hasn't ever been completely dependent on the two, the demigod characters in Indian cricket of Sachin and Kohli. Sure, and Dhoni, I suppose, in white ball cricket. Yeah, of course, they were brilliant players. Of course, Sachin and Virat are extraordinary players, but the rivalry between Australia and India doesn't rely on Sachin Tendulkar and Virat Kohli. It relies on a number of players over a number of generations, and it's a team sport. So I agree with the contention that it's a big loss for the series as far as broadcasters are concerned, but players miss series all the time. Was it any less important for India beating Australia 2 years ago because Stephen Smith wasn't there? I don't think so. I think it was a magnificent achievement from Kohli and his charges to win in Australia, the first Indian side to win in those conditions. So yes, I appreciate that the fandom around Kohli is something that is hard to appreciate until you visit India, which I've obviously had the good fortune of doing. And the way that Sachin is still revered. I mean, you see it each year when the Wisden Cricketers of the Year are announced. People still get angry about the treatment of Indian players when they've not even played in the country that year. I mean, I get it. I get the intensity of the passion. It is wonderful. I love it. I relish it. I wish every cricket nation followed their players the way that Indian fans follow the Indian team. But I do think on this particular question, it is overstated a little bit. If Kohli doesn't play, people are still going to love it.
Right. And imagine, like, one thing we surely miss is the energy he brings, right? Because Kohli's leadership is all about energy and, riling up players in the field, shouting from the top of his lungs for whatever the event that happens, right? So that intensity, do you think India will miss, or this is an different Indian team and it will be the same without Kohli? What do you think?
Well, I was at Ranchi in Dharamshala in 2017 when India won without Kohli on both occasions. Well, Kohli getting injured, obviously, at Ranchi in the field and then not playing at Dharamshala, and India won convincingly under the captaincy of Ajinkya Rahane. So I think that there's a leader that the Indian players clearly hold in high regard. Rahane's got a fine record against Australia as well. So yes, Kohli won't be there for those last three tests, and I think good on him. I think to his immense credit as a human being that Virat was able to realise and have the presence of mind to identify the birth of his first child being more important than three test matches. I'm not sure whether that would have been an easy decision to make maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. I'm glad that the conversation, we had our first child this year, and to think I would have missed that for work. And let's remember, yes, it's cricket, but it's still his job. Like, let's not overplay what it is. I mean, Virat Kohli's entitled to a life outside of cricket as well. And I mean, I would never have missed the birth of my child for work. And I'm glad that Virat's made the decision not to miss the birth of his.
And what would be the batting order then, do you think? So who will replace Kohli? So obviously Rahane will take his number 4 and, Pujara at 3. What do you think? We'll make a speculative 11 in a sense, if you can make a speculative 11 of India, for example.
Well, Hanuma Vihari, having had experience already, he's the logical player to be involved. Mayank Agarwal, of course, has been sort of a revelation as a.
Right.
I find it hard to believe that he's 29 years of age in some respects, but there he is coming into the prime of his career. Cheteshwar Pujara, KL Rahul, two senior statesmen of this Indian team. You put them alongside Rahane, and it's still an imposing 11. I'm not sure exactly where the puzzle pieces fit. In the absence of Kohli when he leaves for the second test match. But it's a pretty strong batting lineup, and they are good options. They are good options everywhere. And the fact that they're coming out of the home summit, granted white ball form, IPL, all the rest, you've got to discount that to a certain extent. But they've had this warm-up game this week against Australia A. They'll have a second warm-up game under lights at the SCG. Not many touring teams get to proper full-strength first-class warm-up games ahead of a test series, and they've had a number of their senior players operating in the white ball teams concurrent to that. And of course, they'll complement the India A team, or the Indian 11, I should say, with players out of the T20 squad who are making the trip staying in Sydney, but are changing uniforms, if you like, before the second game begins on the 11th. So in terms of putting an 11 together, I suppose it's a moot point before Kohli leaves. But what we do know is just that even the more junior players in the side have got experience against Australia, in Australia, and I think that's really important.
And how much will we miss Ishant Sharma, right? The good old Australian veteran, right? Who started it all back in the day from 2008. And his absence, may I say, may not be as big as Kohli's absence in batting order, but he's a massive figure in Indian bowling lineup. Yeah,
it's funny. You think about Ishant Sharma in 2008 when he bowled the house down and that spell famously to Ricky Ponting in that series. Look, and Adam Gilchrist in the one-dayers as well, actually, come to think of it. Look, I think that he is a big loss because Ishant Sharma has improved dramatically in the last few years. I remember when he was in the one-day squad in 2015-16. So they didn't play test matches in Australia. Yeah, they played 5 one-day internationals and 3 T20s, if I recall correctly. And it was almost a point of curiosity. Oh, Ishant Sharma's in the squad. That's interesting. We remember Ishant Sharma from all those years ago. He's kind of a bit over the hill, but here he is. Well, you draw a line in the sand there in early 2016 and press fast forward to where we are today. The body of work he's put together, the way that he bowled in England in 2018 and the way that he bowled in Australia in 18-19, he was quite outstanding as the senior attack leader. So, yeah, it's disappointing that he picked up that stomach injury, which means that he's not in a position to be in the squad in the first instance. Although, I mean, they have talked about adding him, haven't they, to the squad. So, I mean, I guess time will tell as to whether he's fit enough to play later in the series. But, I mean, with Boomer and Shami and Umesh Yadav, I'm so pleased to see how well he's been bowling in the tour game. I remember how well he bowled in the 2017 Border Gavaskar Trophy Series and how he's able to get the ball to genuinely reverse swing. Reverse swing is really important in Australia, especially with the Kookaburra ball. So it may not be as much of a factor under lights at Adelaide, but when you get to Melbourne and Sydney, lifeless tracks, you do benefit from having a bowler who can make it go the other way when the ball does get scuffed up, and Umesh Yadav certainly brings that to the table.
Yeah. And the good old suspense of Rohit Sharma, right? So how do you think he's going to do in the red ball in Australia? I mean, he's the best hooker and puller India has right now. I think he'll do fine if he comes back, right?
Yeah, and look, coming off better red ball form than he was when he played in Adelaide 2 years ago. He was picked for that side. And I know there's always a lot of consternation when talking about Rohit Sharma and red ball cricket. He's, I suppose, comparing what he promises and what he did initially in 2013, those back-to-back hundreds versus what his output has been, and whether he's better suited to batting at the top of the order. Of course, Prithvi Shaw, we didn't mention Shaw earlier, where he fits into this as well. There's some very explosive white ball players, and that's not to diminish Shaw, but just simply that the way we interpret him so far, obviously a fantastic start to his Test career as well, the young man. So, it'll be interesting to see how they all fit in. But I mean, is your expectation that Rohit will play the first Test match?
I don't see that happening, to be honest, because his fitness test is just way too close, and he has to come to Australia, go into quarantine. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe Boxing Day, at worst case, third and fourth, he should be available if he's fit, by the way. So lots of suspense there. But is it fair to say advantage Australia in this series? Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I'm usually fairly sheepish when it comes to making predictions about Test series. And I put in the magazine this month that I thought Australia would win all the Test matches. Now, that was before David Warner was declared as unfit for Adelaide. And I suppose that's before the White Ball Internationals. It just kind of felt watching the Shield this year that Australia are blessed with a lot of players to pick from at a very important time ahead of a very important home series. And historically, India have beaten Australia comfortably at home, and Australia have beaten India comfortably at home. There's been a profound home ground advantage, which is why the Australian tourists of 2004 and the Indian tourists of 2018-19 are held in such high esteem. Winning away from home in the Border Gavaskar series is a really, really big deal and a really hard thing to do. So if India were to back it up and win this time around, it would be a win for the ages, especially without Collin for 3 of the 4 Test matches. If you lose your captain and your best player, for everything I said before about it being a team sport, he remains the best player in that team. It's the most individual team sport there is, naturally. So, you can't underestimate that factor. But also, I just feel as though from an Australian perspective, with a bowling lineup that has potentially Pattinson and Neser on the outskirts, if they're your players not getting a game, you're going pretty well on that front. I mean, Nathan Lyon, all his experience as well, they will find a way to take their 20 wickets each time, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. And the difference between this time around and last time is that I think they'll get their 20 wickets and I think they'll have enough runs to play with. Whereas last time around, they were lacking for runs, which meant their bowlers had to back it up and bowl consecutive days, which meant that bowlers like Stark and Hazelwood and Cummins often would have to bowl, say, three or 4 days out of the Test match. That won't, I don't think, because their batsmen were going so poorly, that is.
Right.
I don't imagine that'll be the case here. Their batsmen will look after them, which will mean that they are fit and firing when they need to be. And that on home soil is a very stern task for any touring side. Despite how well India did 2 years ago, they'll be up against it.
And I think man for man, India's bowling lineup is still really good. I mean, it's just it's totally. as good as ever. I think it all comes down to batting, right? It all comes down to who bats well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the best Indian bowling lineup over the last 2 or 3 years that we've ever seen.
Right.
I mean, there'll be arguments made about the three spin, the triple pronged spin attack that did so well in the late 70s. But I think that as far as the pace bowling lineup, it is tremendously well suited to bowling in England and Australia, and you wouldn't have said that before. So as I mentioned, Bumrah and Shami, class. I mean, A grade, top class. And it's a shame that Ishant Sharma isn't here to round that off. And it's also a shame that Bhuvanesh Kumar isn't available either, because Bhuvi, has had limited opportunities in red ball cricket in recent times. But I'd love to see Bhuvi bowling with a pink ball under lights. And unfortunately, that won't be happening. So, but we haven't even talked about Ashwin. I mean, Ashwin will do his fair share of heavy lifting over here, as he always does. And it might even be the case that Jadeja, irrespective of his fitness in the short term, I mean, Jadeja has found it hard to get into the Indian Test team when they're playing three quicks. And to me, that always feels odd when Jadeja doesn't play, because I kind of feel as though he's got such a fantastic record, especially against Australia. But it might be that he's riding the pine.
Not so odd for Sanjay Manjrekar. I don't know if you are aware of that controversy, but
I think it's best to ignore Sanjay Manjrekar.
Right. You said you don't take punts, Adam, but what do you think? 2-0 Australia?
Well, I feel like I have to back in what I've previously said. I wrote in Wisden Cricket Monthly in the latest edition that I thought Australia would win 4-0. And granted, that was before these injuries. But I do think Australia will win well. I just don't feel, and that's not from any parochial perspective. Anyone that knows the way I write and the way I broadcast, I couldn't care less who wins. I was overjoyed for India 2 years ago when they won. I thought it was a great thing for world cricket. So I haven't got a horse in the game, despite being a proud Australian. I don't sort of feel a parochial connection to a cricket team. I'm a broadcaster and a journalist, not a barracker. But I just kind of, from an objective perspective, watching the two teams, my gut feel says Australia win comfortably. But I would love a situation where after 2 test matches, so Adelaide and Melbourne, we go to Sydney with the series live. I'd love the series to be live in Sydney, and better still, if it's live at Brisbane, well, then that will be magnificent. That'll mean India need to win at the Gabba, potentially, to win the series, which would just be a tremendous way to finish it off. It'll mean packed crowds, and of course they can have a full capacity at the Gabba, and it'll be something special on a ground where Australia have had such a fantastic record across the last 3 decades. We should be so lucky for it all to finish off there at the Gabba in the 3rd week of January.
That would be a great way to end this pathetic 2020. That's been a fantastic podcast, Adam. Thank you very much for doing this. I hope you will be covering for the Cricbuzz for this entire series, and you'll be having a chat with one other expert. And folks, please do follow Adam's podcast, The Final Word. Follow Adam on Cricbuzz, as we all Indians do. Sorry, you were saying something.
Oh, no. Yeah. So the Final Word will be produced daily throughout the course of the Border Gavaskar series. So just type Final Word Cricket into your various podcast browsers. Myself and Jeff Lemon will be doing 20 minutes each night at Stumps. We'll continue our long form interview weekly series twice a week through the course of that series as well. I'll be on Cricbuzz every night with Harsha. Harsha will be in the studio, and I'll be down the line at the different cricket grounds. As you say, and on Twitter, Collins Adam, so you can find all of that in all of those different bits and pieces I'm doing, all aggregated at Collins Adam. And I believe the radio coverage I'm doing is also being back into India. So SEN, which is the Melbourne-based commercial radio broadcaster, I'll be commentating on that radio station. So you'll be able to pick up that call from SEN from their various platforms in India.
Hey, folks, Jeff Lemon and Adam Collins also interviewed Harsha Bhogle on the podcast. So, yeah, I was just listening to that just this morning.
A number of times. A number of times.
Yeah.
You've had Harsha on the show as recently as a few weeks ago talking about, it's a documentary.
Broadcasting, India and broadcasting, yes.
Yeah, India and cricket commentary, and he was fabulous on that. And there's a long interview with Harsha from the 2018 series. We had him as our Christmas special, and he told us all about his life in the game, and it was a beautiful conversation. He's a great man, Harsha, and I'm proud to be his friend.
That's it from the Sollu Kaburz podcast, ladies and gents. And before we leave you, I'll just want to give you a little hope about this series in case you're missing Kohli. Kohli fans, here's the thing. Australia won the series in India in 2004 without Ponting in the team. Gilchrist was the captain.
Absolutely. Well remembered. Good point.
That's it from the Sollu Kaburz podcast, ladies and gents. We'll see you next time with another episode. Bye, everyone.